you're creating essentially power spots wherever you want, in your house, in your farm, whatever you want. And you're allowing that BG3 energy, that energy of God, to ripple through your system by wearing the pendants, ripple through your environment.
We are in an age of modern technology where we have forgotten to create things with life force in mind. And a lot of these ancient societies that didn't know about biogeometry, but they always were building things with the idea that living beings were going to be inside of it, living beings were going to be outside of it, and that, it is magical sounding because nature is magical.
Things that will almost break your brain when you think about them, because they don't go against necessarily, they just stretch you to a whole new level that is almost a full-on psychedelic experience. I mean, like, this is some of the most psychedelic info I've ever learned in a completely sober state of reality. That has just made me come out of it and go, what the fuck was that? I mean, it's absolutely nuts.
And for me, what I think sold me, because I was interested, was the book Back to a Future for Mankind.
That's a great break to start.
Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for dropping in. On this podcast, I'm interviewing Adam Fallon and Ryan Sprague on biogeometry. Biogeometry is one of these things that I kind of always saw as a little bit woo-woo, but the Institute of Biogeometry actually has done a lot of scientific studies with different governments and stuff, and that slowly started to intrigue me. And that can be a very kind of like, scientific kind of guy. But my last podcast with Rocco Moon was actually really about art and spirituality. And I do believe that art can bring about physical changes into our real world just by using shape and energy. So this is kind of like an advanced version of the ideas that we talked about on the last podcast. Throughout this podcast, I am just a student here to learn. You'll see me and hear me ask a lot of good questions, basic questions, silly questions, as I just try to understand what biogeometry is and how we could use it to improve our lives, the people around us, and the entire world. So strap on in, enjoy the podcast, and come in and learn with me.
So in my eyes, biogeometry, the very basics that I get are these signatures, right? These signatures that were either created by Ibrahim Karim himself or from the Egyptian, potentially. Again, I don't know too much about it. And these signatures create this energy called horizontal negative green, and which I believe to be good and good for life. Is that what it is in a nutshell? Using these signatures to create more of this positive energy.
That's part of it for sure. That's what you have a good encapsulation of part of it.
Okay.
I would say the biggest understanding that I take away from it is that it's nature's design language, and using the principles of angle, shape, proportion, number, frequency, and understanding that through the vibrational spectrum that we're able to actually create a centering principle, or bringing a harmonizing to our environment through these different principles. And you can apply it to a very practical application of architecture or farming and different things like that.
Yeah,
It's
super cool. Like, the only thing I would add to that, you did perfect, man. That was a perfect description of it. Like, the way that I explain it to a lot of people is that, the French radiesthesists in like the 17 and 1800s, they did a really good job of mapping out the 12 bands of energy, like things that you reference, like horizontal negative green or vertical negative green, any of these kind of energy qualities, infrared, things like that. But they didn't really figure out the centering, harmonizing energy at the center of everything. And that's what Ibrahim Karim talks about with being BG3, as I understand it, and the 3 bands of energy that really at the center of everything. And so another way you could say that in a less science way is the energy of God, is how I look at it. And so really what you're doing, in my understanding anyway, is that you're creating essentially power spots wherever you want, in your house, in your farm, whatever you want. And you're allowing that BG3 energy, that energy of God, to ripple through your system by wearing the pendants, ripple through your environment. And again, there's a lot more that I haven't learned yet in the advanced course that I'm sure Adam gets into, but yeah, that's how I usually explain it.
Okay, yeah. and this energy is positive, right? And is it all around us, and we're trying to like channel it? Like, if I had a magnifying glass, and am I trying to concentrate it in a certain area, or are we creating it through the biogeometry signatures?
It's a natural, innate thing to life. Like, I would say one of the things to piggyback on what Ryan just said too is Ibrahim really is synthesizing the science and the vibrational science of power spots, but we also are a power spot as a human being. So we have power spots in our entire body, especially the chakra system and all of these different parts of our body and our organs. All of these have the BG3 energy, but a lot of the time, unfortunately, due to all sorts of things in our environment and our chaos, the mental intensity that we're stuck in some, that really creates a disharmony to our system that we're actually in some ways forgetting that natural resonance or that centering principle.
So again, but is it, so we have these spots, so are we amplifying it through these signatures?
What I would
go ahead.
I was going to say, what I would say is, in a way, yes. The way that I think of it is, think of it this way, like in a perfect world, right? If we didn't have all these carrier waves and EMFs and things like that,
right?
We wouldn't necessarily, it's not that we wouldn't need biogeometry, we would still utilize it, but it would be from more of a positive standpoint. Like, and it is from a positive standpoint, but right now in society, there's more and more things being rolled out, like 5G was kind of the latest thing, and there'll be a 6G and all these kind of things. And Ibrahim talks about how there'll be at one point like a reckoning, essentially, like a point at which there's a no return where the human biofield pretty much collapses. And the analogy I usually use to allow people to understand kind of how these different frequencies that we can't see with our naked eye interfere with us is that, imagine that you're in a classroom and you've studied really good for this math test, let's say, right? And this would be the analogy of you're in peak physical condition, you eat the right food, you sleep well, you do all the things, right? But when you get to this classroom, what you didn't know beforehand was that someone was going to be screaming bloody murder in your ear the entire time, right? So no matter how much you study for that test, how well do you think you're going to do on that test? Probably not well. You're going to want to get the hell out of there. And so a lot of us that are in peak physical condition, Czechies, people that are highly optimized, shameless plug, right? Like all of us on the screen, I imagine many of your listeners, the challenge is that even at that level, it's becoming harder and harder to reach optimum condition and optimum health because we have all this interference in our biofield, and our body's kind of getting confused in terms of how to remember how to be a body. Like, we have certain frequencies, and biosignatures can do this too, but that kind of correlate to different metabolic processes, different organs in the body. So like if you have a kidney issue, there's a biosignature for that, etc. But if we think about it, when you were born, your body knew how to regrow a kidney, or how to grow a kidney, how to grow a liver, etc. And so those frequencies exist within us. But at the same time, when there's so much interference, there's interference. And so what ends up happening is the biofield gets confused and it essentially falls out of peak health, is how I describe it.
Got it. And is that biofield the BG3 energy?
Adam might know better than I on that.
I would say that biofield is all of the different vibrational spectrum of the bands, but the BG3 is the centering, it is the unified source, it is the field beyond our physical being that actually is there at all times. And that's actually what our physical being is based on. So it's going way further than just the physical, even emotional, mental. It's going all the way to the actual beginning of the source. Nothing, the zero, the source.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. So with that being said, how do these, because all I really know is, I see these signatures, right? I see them on the hands. I see you kind of dousing and kind of like figuring them out. Like, which one do people need? How do these squiggly, almost musical note shaped signatures bring about that BG3?
You want to take that, or
you can take that one? That might be something better than I.
Well, I would say, so what they talk about is Ibrahim actually spent countless amount of time researching and using the vibrational spectrum and actually using the physical radiesthesia, which is a form of radiesthesia and sensing certain energies that's not asking a mental question. And through that process, he actually found that each organ has all of these different shape patterns, almost similar to acupuncture meridians. And so he was able to actually synthesize those piece by piece and help. And all of those are actually three-dimensional patterns that happen in our body. And he talks a lot about the very basic of the principle is that energy creates shape and shape determines the function of whatever is happening. So the shape of our organ is a very specific shape for a reason. It's not just a random shape, and otherwise our organs would all be same shape. And so he talks about how all of these different patterns are actually helping our organs and our glands and whatever we're targeting remember that. And that's also how he mapped it out.
Yeah.
Okay, so I get that. So he kind of created them by tapping into that.
Yeah,
that's cool. Okay, that actually was perfect. I love that one. I was thinking if humans were to create our organ shapes, they'd probably all be fucking square.
You'll be as charged.
Just the heart box, the lung box. Oh my God.
Considering how blue-pilled our society is, yeah, they'd definitely be squares for sure.
Right.
100%.
When it comes to like using this now in like on the field, because I know the signatures are cool because you get them on the body, and that kind of like helps bring some harmonization to those systems. Now I've seen Adam as well. You kind of like douse around, and I'm wondering, Ryan, is that what you do when you're growing your cannabis? Are you dousing and trying to harmonize that energy? Can you explain that process a little bit?
Definitely. So I do a couple different things in there. So number one, the basics is I have the cube in there. I also have the stickers on all of my electrical appliances. I also have them on the water line. I also have it on the electrical panel and the electrical lines. So I have
Could you explain the stickers?
Yeah, absolutely. So if for anyone listening, if you go on BioGeometry's website, yeah, I recommend BG Shop online if you're in America, just because it comes from Canada. It's a little bit quicker. But if you go on there, like the number one thing you'll see is what's called the home kit. And it's super simple. You don't really need to understand biogeometry really at all to be able to apply it, which is what's great about biogeometry, because it's such a deep qualitative science. But the fact, like how I know Abraham's a master is you could explain it to a 5-year-old. Like you really could. Like just put these things here, they do this, etc. So when you buy the home kit, you're going to get the cube, right? Right here. So this is the cube right here. And this is a really powerful device. And that's going to be sucking in different negative frequencies, energies, things like that. So you got to clear it once a day on what's called a clearing tray. You get that in the home kit too. And then you're going to get some attachments, which are not the stickers, but these are like little plastic. They kind of look like, I don't even know what to describe them as, but they're little tiny plastic attachments. And what you're going to be doing is you'll either have an EP, an E, or a W. So the W goes on the water line. The E goes on just like electrical wires, right? If you have like a group of them going up, you can put them on that. And the EP actually goes right on your electrical panel. And so those are balancing out. They're putting BG3 into your water lines, into your electricity, and harmonizing them. And then you also have a series of stickers. You have the L90s, which are kind of like, I actually have one right here on my pendant. You can see that shape right there. It's a little hard to see, but there we go. Yep, you can see it there. So the L90, and those are really good for mirrors. They're good for electrical appliances, but then you also have L66s. And correct me if I'm wrong, Adam, but are the L66s the Wi-Fi router ones, or are those separate?
No, those are like more for electrical impedances and things like that, because they're more towards the physical vitality plane.
Gotcha. Yeah, and then you have the actual Wi-Fi stickers as well, and like the ones you put on your router and things like that. And so I'll have those throughout my room. That's kind of like the basics that anyone can go buy a home kit and do that. And then there's a shape that is on the charging plate. It's a little dirty right there, but I've been putting a lot of stuff on here. But this shape right there, I had my buddy, Eric Blackwell from Colorado. He's a woodworker. And so I had him actually take the dimensions of that and make those shapes out of pine. And then I put one of those in each one of my pots. And I don't know, I've tested it. It doesn't really matter what angle I put them. But the way I do it is I'll have one plant in the back, then two, and two, and then another one usually, right? And so what I'll do is I'll put the one that is in the front, I'll have it facing this way. Then I'll have each of the sides facing in, and then I'll have the back one facing this way. And
so you got 4 of those.
Yeah. Well, I have 7 of them total in there. One for each plant. Yeah, one for each plant. And so then he also 3D printed a bunch of them. So I just put them all throughout my room. Like I just have them everywhere.
That's awesome.
Yeah. and then what I do is I do the rotation technique. So like as I'm putting a 5x5 pot plant into its 20-gallon final container, what I'll do is I'll have the hole right where I'm going to put it in. And then I'll take the plant out of the pot. I'll put it in there and I'll test. And then I'll see at what angle I rotate it to does it test for the highest BG3? And then that's when I'll actually like put the rest of the soil on. And then sometimes I'll do the color balancing. I don't do that too much anymore just because I found I'm like, do I really need anything else at this point, you know? And so those are the things I do in the grow room. When I'm outside growing outdoor, I'll usually have a cube somewhere near there. I think if I remember correctly, they do about 5,000 square feet, one cube, Adam. Is that accurate? 5,000 square feet?
I believe so. I'd have to double check, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it's around 5,000. And so I'll usually have one like, you know, in the shed next door on the white piece of paper, right? They explain all this. I don't really want to get into details, but it's important to have it not around really anything else, like not in 6 inches from either side of it and on a white piece of paper. So I'll have that in like the garage next door, and then I'll put the wooden shapes in there. I'll do the rotation technique. But obviously, since I'm not using any electricity there, I don't use any of the stickers or anything like that when I'm outdoor. But that's how I do it, man. And, you know, one of the things I noticed was the first harvest that I had with BioGeometry, I did not change anything in my grow. I was using the same exact soil because I do no-till gardening. So I had the same soil, the same genetics, not just the same like genotype, but the same phenotype. Like I literally took clones of these plants. I didn't change anything. I had the same room, same lighting, same everything. And what I noticed at the end of my harvest was that my yield went up between 15 and 20%. And my total cannabinoid and terpene volume, the cannabinoids went up about 3%. And then, cannabinoids were up about 7%, and then terpenes went up about 2 to 3%. So that's when I noticed my first harvest, and that's when I started gifting flower to Paul Chek, and that's when he was like, "Dude, there's something wildly different with this." Because again, like with qualitative things, they are subtle to a certain degree, and a lot of the people around me at that stage of my life, this is like 3-4 years ago. You know, I love them to death, but they weren't highly optimized. They didn't, you know, they weren't doing the spring water, eating healthy, et cetera. So they couldn't feel the difference. I hadn't consumed any other cannabis in so long that I didn't understand. I didn't have another control to compare it against. But Paul and then Aubrey and other people were the ones that were like, dude, this is really crazy stuff. So I had seen it in quantitative metrics with cannabinoid and terpene content and yield, but I had also seen it in the qualitative aspect when it came to the energy surrounding the medicine as well. So super powerful stuff.
So you tested it? Like, do you send it to a lab or?
Yeah, we have a lab here in Boston called MCR Labs. So all I got to do is just drive it out there, wait like a week, and then you'll get your test results back. So I had tested these same strains about 6 months prior. Again, same soil, same everything. I hadn't changed anything. And then after my first harvest with BioGeometry, I was like, well, this would be interesting. Let me just see it. I wasn't expecting to see anything, but when I saw the yield increase, that's what got me curious. You know, I was like, that's very interesting. Because again, like I'm never really minding about yield or anything. It's not one of the things I grow for, but it was an interesting change. And so I got it tested and found that like 5 to 6% in cannabinoid content went up, and then 2 to 3 in terpenes as well, which is wild.
Dude, that's awesome. Adam, you also showed me something about like apples, right? Wasn't there like this study where like they kind of did something with the apples? Can you explain that one too? Because I think Ryan kind of subtly said something about angling. Right, there's a specific angle that you get with the BG3, right? Could you explain that? Because I'm still a little fuzzy with that one.
Yeah. So one of the cool things about the BG3 is that basically a lot of it is about the angle, and they talk about how angle is really you're actually in a way communicating with the angels. They talk about a lot, which I'm still in certain ways wrapping my head around, but in a very practical sense, angle actually helps stimulate the center. And certain things at certain angles, like for instance, the color balancing, those actually, because for instance, they're complementary colors, they could be any color, but you are finding and testing physically where that color goes in the space and the actual defined space, usually a wall or some defined perimeter. And then through that, you're able to actually find where those go, and that creates a centering energy in the entire space. And so with the Apple project, it was actually pretty incredible because from what I understand, he used a lot of the 45-degree angle emitter like Ryan uses. Yeah. And he also used a lot of color balancing. So we had stakes that had different colors. And what was fascinating is he actually showed, because they were having a huge issue with all the apples, and they needed to have all sorts of pesticides and things like that to grow them because they were having a huge issue with bugs. And what Ibrahim showed them is he took a wooden stake that had a certain color, and he was walking around the perimeter of just one plant. And there was a beetle on that. And he was showing that when he got to a certain angle, that's where it stimulated the BG3, the bug would just jump off. Because the bug is there, it has its natural signal from nature that this is a dying plant and I need to consume it so that I can recycle it and bring it back into the nature cycle. But when he actually brought the BG through this colored stake, he actually then showed that then it doesn't have a signal to be eaten anymore. So when you use things like color balancing, you're actually just, in a way, creating a virtual angle that creates the BG3 harmonization.
Got it. Wow, that's fucking beautiful. That's almost unbelievable. And I think this is seriously, this is the tough part about like me as an outsider trying to understand, right? Is like, so you're saying I use some colors and then I do some squiggly lines, I wear a pendant, and then all of a sudden everything's good. You know what I mean?
Well, one thing to piggyback on that, because I felt the same way when I first discovered it, and then it really just took me down a rabbit hole where I started to see more and more the legitimacy, and especially looking at all the research projects are mind-blowing, because what they show you is that a lot of these things, it's environmental energy balancing. So in certain aspects, unless you're very sensitive, you might not notice right away, but they show that in many times when they're doing, for instance, like blood test results in the hepatitis C project, or when they're looking at like yield and production of these apples and seeing actually how long they last and how much nutrition and micronutrients they have in them versus the control, that's when you really see an entire difference with the BG3 and the biogeometry.
Wow, that's beautiful, man. And how do we how do we validate these things? You said, you mentioned there's a lot of research and stuff. Is this I heard someone talk about them growing like food produce in like sand. Was that?
No, so they use salt water. Because there's an entire issue.
Is that true?
Yes.
So is that documented?
Yeah, in 19.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, and they have it online too. But in 1998, basically, they had in previous biogeometry experiments, plants showed enhanced growth quality and increased shelf life. And so in this experiment, they actually tested the possibility of using biogeometry to enhance freshwater plants to grow in salt water, because they were having huge issues near the Red Sea of having enough plants and produce. And so the two-month experiment showed insane results. Basically, they took, and a lot of it was basically showing that the actual energy of the water is more important than the actual chemical components, which is something that's hard to wrap your mind around. I mean, even for me, I was like, there's no way. But they showed that the controlled variables, and actually basically using things like shape of the container that the sweet potato was grown in, as well as the actual way that the water traveled into it, and all of these different things. So they were completely charging it the entire time with BG3. And so they did a control, they did one with fresh water, and they did one with salt water from the Red Sea. And actually, funny enough, the saltwater one with the BG3 grew better than the freshwater one.
Oh, wow. Oh my God.
Yeah,
that's
I remember
insane.
that. I remember that from Foundations. I thought it was the Dead Sea, but they rhyme, so.
Or maybe it is the Dead Sea. I don't know. It's one of those.
Dead, red, same thing. Tomato.
Now I like to structure my water in many ways. Is there a way to structure water using biogeometry?
Yeah, you can definitely charge it. I do that to all my spring water. Like I have the charging plate typically underneath my 5 gallon, and I test for if it's working, and it always is, even if it's like not right on it. Another thing I do personally, I'd love to hear what you do, Adam, as well. But especially I just got that same blue water bottle, bro. I'm pretty sure it's the same one. Does it have like the
Yep.
Yeah, dude. I just got one of those at Confluence.
I love these.
I know there's some stuff in there as well. I forget what the lady had said. I was listening to 3 different conversations at once. But one of the things I'll do is I'll actually I'll add in some stickers to some of my bottles every once in a while. I'll put like a sticker on there, and I'm not really sure how effective that is, but I just kind of got an intuitive hit to like, I stick a water attachment on my 5 gallons sometimes. I've done the L90s that fell off of this bottle, but I've done different stickers on there. But I'd love to hear if you're doing anything, Adam, that you've learned in the advanced course, because I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, right now I've been experimenting. I mean, definitely. I think also just having your grid harmonized, which could be a whole subject that we could talk about or not. But basically the Earth has a natural grid patterns that are called Hartman and Curry lines, and those have been around throughout antiquity, but they've gotten more and more intense due to the electrosmog and all of the different 5G and Wi-Fi. All of those have a similar carrier wave to what those Earth grids are, and sometimes the Earth grids are beneficial. Obviously, that's what created the BG3 and actually the power spots that the entire science is based around, which is like, for instance, the pyramids are based on an exact power spot that harmonizes and helps spread that energy to the entire society that was in it.
Yeah.
And so with the water, for instance, like just having the grids harmonized in my home, I already notice a difference with the quality of the water for sure. But definitely I like the stickers. I like the color balancing. I mean, for me, it's just really been a lot of, I've been enjoying also like using the human archetype ruler, which is a new tool that I've just been introduced to. And like, I'm still very much a baby with it because I'm just learning and experimenting with it. But there is a lot of incredible things you can do because you can basically clear anything, but I actually have been using it to clear like the water that I get and actually clear all of the different planes of nature from the water.
Yeah.
But I would say there's definitely an aspect of that it is creating structured water.
Okay, beautiful. Now, as a lay person or even as an advanced person, where do I partake in this? Like, let's say like I'm listening right now and I'm like, yo, this BG3 stuff sounds fucking awesome, which it does. It literally sounds like magic, and it really makes it hard for me to like believe it as much as I'm just like, yeah, let's fucking do it. How do people partake into, biogeometry? Do they have to take the course to figure this out? Or you mentioned just buying the products and just throwing them on the table with a white piece of paper?
I would say the products, I mean, for me, what I think sold me because I was interested was the book, Back to a Future for Mankind.
That's a great place to start. Yeah. And really, like, if you're someone listening who's like, I'm interested in this, but I don't know if I'll ever take the courses, like things like that. Like Adam said, the book is a great place to start. And then in terms of like what the essentials are, as I see them, and Adam, definitely tell me if I'm missing anything. But for me, it's the biosignatures pendant. This one right here. You can also get a ring of it if you don't like wearing it on a necklace, but you'll have to wear the L90. They don't make an L90 ring, but the L90 is kind of like the upgrade for 5G, if I understand correctly. I think that's what Ibrahim had said.
It definitely helps harmonize with that,
Yeah, and then the other thing would be the home kit. Just like doing basic home, the next step would be like do foundations, learn how to balance your grid, like Adam was talking about, and learn how to like do some of the techniques, work with the pendulums, things like that. But it's really, really fun, and I'm interested to hear more about the human archetype ruler. I know you just got introduced to it, but they accidentally on the European site let me buy the human archetype pendant.
Oh, hell yeah.
I was an advanced student. So people ask about it all the time, and they're like, what is that? And I'm like, and I remember, I remember we were at Angie's house, at Paul and Angie's house, and I asked Angie, and she gave the most beautiful description of it possible, and like 5 minutes into it, I realized I was elsewhere, and I was like, fuck, Paul had got me in the bags by that point, so.
Adam, you have that one too. What is that? It looks like a clear...
Yes. This is, this is the wearable version. So the human archetype ruler is a pretty large ruler that is a 10 by 19 grid, and it has basically what they use in a lot of the Egyptian art that people see as hieroglyphs is actually, it's based on a lot of the 10 by 19 grid, and really 19 is a very special number because it represents basically the archetype of what humanity and the human body is built upon, and the chakra system and all of those things. So they were using these different understandings of proportion and angle to create their art so that it had a living function. Because one thing that I wanted to circle around too before I forget is that a lot of this, if you do feel inspired and you're curious about it, like, we are in an age of modern technology where we have forgotten to create things with life force in mind. And a lot of these ancient societies that didn't know about biogeometry, but they always were building things with the idea that living beings were going to be inside of it, living beings were going to be outside of it, and that, it is magical sounding because nature is magical. But we have unfortunately thought and forgot that we're not part of nature, that we're some kind of being that's beyond, but we're actually just a microcosm of the macrocosm. We are actually part of that. So it's like when we actually come back to using these grounded tactics, like I love it too, because as someone that is really fascinated by esoteric things and a lot of these different principles, I think it's brought a lot of the things I've been fascinated throughout my life into actually tangible, usable things of like, okay, if I apply this certain color, or if I put this certain strip, or even don't buy any of them at all, and I understand the principles so deeply, I can create my own tools that will harmonize whatever in my life to create a better life for, just living in ultimate harmony.
That's one of the
Beautifully
things
said.
I forgot to say too, is one of the other things I'll do with water is I'll put like a piece of tape on there, and I'll just put 16 dots on there. Because if I remember correctly, 16 is the number that always emits BG3. The way they talked about it in the foundations course was like 19 sometimes does BG3, but it's important for other stuff. We never really got to that in foundations, but I'll put that on there too. So for someone listening, what's up?
19 is the spirit. It's like the more spiritual level.
Gotcha. That makes
And what's 16?
16. You can probably describe it better than I can, Adam.
So 16 is basic. Well, what Ibrahim found throughout his research was that, basically the golden ratio is one of them, but basically the 5-to-8 ratio, or these different proportions, and also just number has a qualitative source. So actually, like the way that we think of number is very linear, but actually numbers have a specific energetic quality that actually can even be matched with the vibrational band. And what's fascinating is that, like, for instance, kind of we talk about it in the Czech Institute too, but it's like a musical note is also a color, and that qualitative scale is also a number and a proportion. And so, for instance, the number 16 they found to be a very stable number that has the BG3 quality, and it's the first whole number that has the BG3 quality.
Yeah.
And so is it like putting 16 dots, or just putting the number 16 on it, or is it the intention?
It has to be
16
of the actual, and it has to be a similar quality of the shape. So it has to be 16 circles or 16 stars or whatever you decide, but it has to be the same quality.
Okay, so I just can't buy the new Apple iPhone number 16 this August, and it's going to be free of any type of EMF.
You'd have to buy 16 of them, 16 of them, and then you'll be good, bro.
And then put them all together. Yeah, exactly.
Put them all together, dude. That's actually
Put them in a
pretty funny.
circle, yeah.
Think about it, like one of the things that Ibrahim goes against so much, having 16 of them together. Like, Ibrahim, am I doing this right? He's like, dude, you missed the point, bro.
Yeah, you have like 16 of iPhones out at the same time.
I got 16 TVs. I got 16 amplifiers. I got everything in 16s,
So if I wanted to, I can get a water bottle and kind of, is it like circular dots? I can put 16 dots around a water bottle.
It just has to be in a recognizable group, basically. Yeah. So
it doesn't have to be in a row. It could be kind of just in a recognizable group, in a sphere, just together.
Yeah, and they show, I forget exactly. I still want to go back and review this stuff, but you can also put them in different shapes and things like that, and it'll create different energy qualities in addition to the BG3. But
yeah.
Okay, is there something like that in biogeometry where you carry around 16 of something, or?
Well, in a way, if I remember correctly, I don't know if the biosignatures pendant has 16 something on it, but the electrical panel, the water panel, etc., they don't necessarily. One side of it, like if you see the electrical panel, I wish I had one I could show you guys. Actually, I do. Oh, I didn't even plan for this. So,
hell yeah.
If you look at this, and Adam, you may have to correct me on a little bit of this, but if you look at, I only have water ones. So I have a big water one and a small one, but on this side right here, if you count those increments, that's 16. Now, on the other side, there's a specific number. I think it's either 9 or 11. I forget if
11 for water, I believe.
11 for water, yeah. And then there's a different one for electricity. I think, is that one 9?
Yeah, I think that one's 9, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So there's like, you always want 16 to emit BG3, but then you're kind of like, the way I would describe it in layman's terms is like, you have this energy, BG3, where do you want to direct it? Now, if you're directing it to water, there's a specific number for water, which is this right here, right? This is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11. and then you'll have one for electricity as well. So that's actually what the attachments look like. And these you'll put on your water line. These are the water ones. And there's a very similar looking one for the electrical, and then one for the EP that we talked about as well.
And yeah, and what's cool too that like I think Robert teaches really well, and Ibrahim talks a lot about is like a lot of these things, just kind of like how Paul talks about these are all things I'm teaching you, but don't believe a word I say. Go test it yourself.
Exactly.
And they talk a lot about that in biogeometry. It's like these are all concepts that we're teaching you because this is what we found in our research, but you don't have to believe anything. Go test it. Now you have the tools to go test it and feel the difference, and test and see if you can actually sense these energies, because it's also the organs of perception that we have now as humans is much lessened, where we originally, now we're in a very left brain perception, but throughout a lot of our antiquity and our ancient civilizations were very in a right brain perception. So they were actually one with nature. They could see auras, and they weren't thinking they were seeing auras. They were just seeing energetic fields and things like that. And so a lot of these things are bringing you back to just a lot of these things that we know and actually are inside all of us. It's just almost like, you're going to the gym and working out. We have these organs of subtle energy perception that we have to build back up. And I think a biogeometry is a great system. There's many beautiful systems that also teach this, but that's just one of them.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I kind of want to wrap up a little bit here. Is there an aspect of this, because we're working on a different energy field, right? And I'm a big believer in the mind and that our mind's body connection with source and our ability to get to source either by having just that intention of like connection. Is there any aspect of biogeometry where there's not even any numbers, any type of signatures, but using your mind to connect to either BG3 or that source field? Is there? I have a feeling there is, but I'm not too sure.
There is. There definitely is.
Okay.
There definitely is. There's a lot. I think one of the things that's brilliant that they teach that gets more into using advanced levels of focus. And I think it's like something also that probably everyone has their own level. And I feel like I like having systems that kind of challenge me to practice my focus and my awareness, but really your awareness, like things like prayer and blessing are extremely important in that fact that they create the BG3 actually as well. And they have a very strong horizontal negative green aspect. And they show how just a little
like the thought, right? The thought
and the feeling, and actually going into that state of prayer. They talk about how a lot of the saints, for instance, the golden halo around them is actually just a representation of the actual centered energy, the BG3 or whatever you want to call it, the unified source field. That's actually being created when they're in that state of blessing or prayer.
Beautiful. So if I have good thoughts, I'm creating some source of BG3 in my mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, I heard, have you guys heard Terrence Howard speak?
Terrence
Don't
Howard.
think so.
He's that actor from, what's what I call it? He was in Hustle and Flow. I'll send you guys some of his stuff. Dude, he's like like a Hollywood famous actor. You hear him talk, he's an astrophysicist, and he's like inventing shit, and I'm just like, whoa, who are you, dude? It's pretty nuts.
That's
but
awesome.
he mentioned that that energy, just like a bubble, is spherical. Like anytime you expand energy, it's always in a sphere. So going back to that halo example, if you see a lot of the old texts, they're always spheres, right? Is that the shape of BG3? Is it also spherical?
Well, the BG3 is the center of the sphere. The sphere would be the representation of really the physical plane and the expansion of the actual spiritual plane to the physical.
So BG3 is a center of everything.
Yeah, so literally if you draw a cross, for instance, between that cross where there's actually nothing, that's also where BG3 would be if you were to measure it with an actual pendulum.
Okay, I think it's finally clicking with me now, what BG3. That's why you said it was like a God energy source.
Yeah.
Because it's the center.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's at the root of everything. you know, and
Oh shit! All right, now I'm getting it. All right, cool.
it's super interesting too, because in terms of like practicality, I'll give you guys a quick story, and I'll have to leave some names out. You know, some names have been changed in the story, but let's just say that when it comes to qualitative sciences and, you know, a lot of these different esoteric programs out there and things like that, there's some interesting things going on. So let's just say I was a part of an organization for a while that does certain DNA upgrades through the etheric field with crystals and things of that nature. And I have a friend who is really good friends with Robert Gilbert, and she got invited out to a wedding with some of her colleagues, let's say there, and she decided to bring Robert for a +1. She was coming out to Vegas, he's in Vegas, and he had helped her a lot when she was in a very dark place in her life. And so they go out there as friends and they're hanging out, and she goes to introduce Robert, and she doesn't really say anything about his background, and he's like, you know, Mr. Humble, right? And kind of just looks like a really cool grandfather, you know? So they're talking to him, and the first question they ask him is, have you activated them yet, right? And so he plays dumb, and he's like, what do you guys mean, activation, right? And they're like, oh, well, we use this wand, and we do this stuff, and it's really beautiful. And he's like, oh, cool. What energy quality is coming out of the tip of that thing that you use? And they're like, oh, it's from Ensof, which is their term for the God, not a God. That would be Elohim, but Ensof, like, is a very similar thing to what we're talking about with BG3. And he's like, yeah, I get that, but like, what quality of energy? And so they start getting kind of flustered, and they kind of just turn their back and kind of exit the conversation. And so he tells this woman, right, that he's with, my friend, he's like, that's a little weird. He's like, I'd like to test yours up close and personal if you don't mind. And so she says, yeah, sure, no problem. And so he tests it, and what does he find coming off the tip? A shit ton of vertical negative green, right? There was some good stuff in there too, right, to be fair, but they obviously had no idea what energy qualities they were working with. And so again, like, you know, even though we can't see these energy qualities with the naked eye, you better believe they do interfere with us. And there's actually a study that, Adam, you might have more of an awareness on than I learned it back in Foundations a couple of years ago, but there was a study of a guy who was working with different energy qualities and basically ended up killing himself and maybe someone else by accident by messing with vertical negative green. Do you know that story, Adam?
Yes. So Jean
Oh my God.
Jean Marais was one of the original French radiesthesists that helped develop. So Louis Turin, he was a French radio wave engineer that first created the first 11 bands and mapped out the 11 bands. And they found a 12th band, which was negative green, which they became obsessed with because they were fascinated. It could actually penetrate through thicknesses of lead more than X-rays or any microwaves or any of these different carrier waves. And so they started studying it, and they realized that a hemisphere emits the negative green, but little did they realize that also, along with the horizontal, it emits vertical negative green, which vertical negative green, just to give like a brief synopsis, is the energy that's associated with death or this physical going to the spiritual plane. Right. So it's not necessarily bad, but we do kind of see it as something like vertical waves in general are not all harmful, but most of the harmful waves are vertical. Yeah. And so they had built all these hemispheres, and it's kind of funny when you look at the pictures that they were showing in the presentation, because they're these two scientists that are, you know, in the world of physics, and they're like fascinated and studying, and these hemispheres emit a shit ton of vertical negative green. And basically Jean Marais, unfortunately, he was found almost mummified in his lab because he had been exposed to way too much vertical negative green. Wow. And it's very dehydrating. It's a very intense energy that they like later, I think the scientists after him even found, like when they picked up that information, they found that, for instance, like venomous plants and animals and things like that also have vertical negative green. Yeah. But yeah, like it's also, I mean, just to piggyback on what you said, Ryan, as I'm very curious, this is something I just want to throw into the sphere if anyone listens to this, is like with the whole popularity of domes being a place that people go and hang out, you know, like all these like raves and things in domes and in pyramids too. If those aren't corrected, those are emitting a shit ton of very dehydrating energy that was used for very specific purposes in places like Egypt and all these places. And I don't know that anyone's correcting these. So I'm just very curious now.
More than likely not, dude. Like, think about it. Like, think about most people that are building buildings, right? Like, they're just putting things up and leaving them be. And I think, like, that's one of the things where I feel so grateful to have found biogeometry in my life because, you know, obviously there's so much to understand when you hear Ibrahim or Robert talk about it. I mean, there's like you could spend a whole lifetime trying to learn this stuff and still be just cracking the surface. But when it comes to the science behind it, right? If you look into the Hamburg emitter experiment and things like that, like Ibrahim's been doing this since 1968, which is like pretty wild if you think about it. Like, he's got so many different studies out there that are the gold standard of, you know, science today, double-blind, placebo-controlled studies, all of these kind of things that are showing this over and over again. Things that will almost break your brain when you think about them because they don't go against necessarily. They just stretch you to a whole new level that is almost a full-on psychedelic experience. I mean, like, this is some of the most psychedelic info I've ever learned in a completely sober state of reality that has just made me come out of it and go, what the fuck was that? You know, I mean, it's absolutely nuts.
No, I really think it's like a remembrance when we are able to remember a lot of these ancient technologies. And I think the more that we can get out of the mindset that there's all these ancient people were just like, oh yeah, we're going to just put these things here and we don't know anything. We don't have any cars or electric cars, you know. It's like, no, they were very advanced and we're in certain ways catching up to them. I don't think it's the other way around sometimes, you know. It's like,
you know,
what's beautiful,
you know,
guys.
What's funny about that too is we can kind of see a microcosm of that macrocosm if we look at culture right now. You know, in America and Western countries, and Eastern countries too, we pride ourselves on our technology, right? And we pride ourselves on 5G and connecting through Zoom and all these things that are awesome. Like, they are great, they're super cool. I'm very grateful for them. But at the same time, like, think about how many people don't have the basics of, like, did you move your body today? Did you eat high quality food? Did you get some quiet time? Did you do something that makes you feel happy, right? Like the 4-doctor system. So think about it this way. You know, if we look at Western cultures as, yes, we have this incredible skyscraper, but on the shakiest foundation. And then we go somewhere like an indigenous culture where they don't have Zoom, they don't have cell phones, they don't have any of that, but they're all living in harmony with nature. They're doing some really wild stuff. I mean, talking to people like Hamilton Souther, one of his first stories that he told me was, I asked him, I said, what was the first, like, you know, event when you went down to the jungle that totally blew your mind? And he said, well, I met an elder in this village, and he told me to go stand on this rock over there. And so I just went and stood on the rock. And the second I stepped on the rock, all of a sudden I was in the Sahara, right? I was like literally in the Sahara Desert. I was seeing all these different animals and everything like that. And he's like, I was completely in shock for like 5 minutes. I get off the rock and I walk over to him and he goes, what'd you see? And he goes, yeah, I feel like I was in a desert. He goes, oh, yeah, it's a portal to the Sahara Desert. So like things like that are just so normalized. Like, whatever. Like, of course it's a portal, duh. Like, you know what I mean? But like, they break our brain the same way that if we went down there, maybe not in indigenous culture these days, but to certain people in the world with a cell phone, they would be like, what the hell is that? You know? So it's the same thing playing out. Like, I think that as human beings, we want to believe we're the most advanced because the ego wants us to believe that. And maybe in certain ways we are. But if you look at the classic tale, whether it was true or not, of Atlantis and Lemuria, I really feel like that's kind of what we're talking about here, where we're in a modern day Atlantis, where, yeah, we got all this technology and this masculine energy driving everything, and it's so awesome. But Lemuria, on the other hand, is more of these indigenous cultures, you know, biogeometry, all of this very in-depth stuff that is very in tune with nature. And what happened with Atlantis and Lemuria is that Atlantis ended up blowing up Lemuria because Atlantis, what happened was they went so deep into technology that they started getting viruses that would take over viruses, right? That would take over in pandemics and things like that. And they went to Lemuria to try to figure out how to live back, how to, you know, create health again. And Lemuria had these red stones they would hold on to essentially reach immortality. And they went over there to try to like strong arm them out of them. Lemuria was like, no way. And they ended up blowing up Lemuria, and they blew themselves up in a 3-stage cataclysm over like, you know, 7,000 years or more than that actually. So, you know, it's very interesting to see like the implications of like all this technology and what Ibrahim's talking about, how like, hey, it's cool that we can talk to each other like this. And it doesn't mean that we have to go away with all this stuff, but can we be responsible with how we're putting this stuff out? Can we do things like biogeometry so we can have our cake and eat it too? And that cake can be gluten-free. You know, like there's ways to have both, you know, this is not a, we need to go back to living in caves and go back to, you know, cooking everything by an open fire, unless you want to. It's not about that.
Yeah.
It's about how do we, you know, kind of meet people where they're at and enhance it with biogeometry and things that will keep us safe. So it's super cool.
Yeah, very well said. Absolutely agree.
Cool, guys.
Yeah.
Let's do some closing thoughts. Anything you wanted to say, didn't get to say, something that a person listening to this could take away and be like, okay, I get it. I want to get into it.
I would say one of the biggest takeaways for me I'm still wrapping my head around, though, is just like the fact that our entire reality that we think is real, and what we think is real, and what we think our reality is so much more beyond that. And that proven over and over, time and time again, we've seen that there's so many layers and dimensions of our reality that when we actually can open up to that and actually start opening ourselves, that we are connected to God through everyone and everything, then, and especially in a tangible way, like systems like biogeometry or whatever we use, and actually really applying that to our life and doing the things that we really want to do, that really is what opens up our souls to like a whole other pathway. I mean, if I would have told myself that I was going to be deep in this stuff, like even 4 years ago, I wouldn't have believed it. So it's like when you open your heart to whatever it's leading you to, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it stretched my mind beyond my imagination. Like what I believe is true and real is completely different than even just a year ago.
Yeah, 100%. I would say, I would echo everything you just said, Adam. You said that perfectly. And what I would add to it is that it has really allowed me to tap into, and I mean biogeometry by it has really allowed me to tap into not only being able to actually put names and quantify some of the things I feel in psychedelic medicines and some of those things that are really hard to put language to. Like when you're deep in a mushroom experience and you feel one with everything, it's like, oh, I am a BG3 emitter, right? There's a new way to think about it. Also, the other thing too is that when you tap into things like this, at least for me, it's really allowed me to realize I'm never going to know anything. And that's awesome.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, like to the degree that we have mystery in our lives is the degree to which we can be fucking happy. Because think about kids, right? They don't know anything about anything and they don't care to. They haven't been taught that they have to know things yet. And because of that, they're in heaven. And then as we get adulterated and move through life and we get stacked higher and deeper, right, with PhDs piled higher and deeper, all this stuff, what starts happening is we thirst trap ourselves into thinking we know things. And when you get into biogeometry, it's not a science of knowing anything. It's a science of being curious, having imagination, awe, wonder, and being able to be your own little scientist and really go out and, like Adam said, right? Like I love what Ibrahim and everyone says. People will ask them questions of like, oh, would this work? And he's like, I don't know, go test it. Like I'm not the guru here. Like, this is an ever evolving science that we all get to be part of. And we all get to bring the mystery back into our lives in realizing that we're living out this illusion of separation, but we are not actually separate, like Adam said, right? Like we are connected to everything. And we can actually have it in quantifiable means now with regards to biogeometry to prove that. So it's really cool. And it's stretched my mind, beyond where I thought it could go. And I've enjoyed psychedelics for a long time. So the fact that it stretched my mind even past that is just absolutely amazing. I'm forever grateful for it.
Absolutely.
Hell yeah, brothers.
Hell yeah.
That was perfect.